I woke up in a coffin. No metaphor. No exaggeration. Just darkness, silence, and the slow realization that I had been buried alive, and the voices I heard just beyond the lid belonged to my husband and my best friend. At first, I couldn't move. My arms were pinned against my sides by something soft but tight, cloth, maybe, or padding. My lungs fought for breath in the stale air, and every shallow inhale burned like ash. My head throbbed, my vision flickered in and out of blackness, and a sour taste clung to my tongue like old metal. Panic was the first thing I tasted. Reason came later. The space was small, barely enough to stretch my legs. I couldn't lift my arms, but I could wiggle my fingers, and when I did, they brushed the top of the box I was in. Wood. Satin lining. I knew exactly where I was. A coffin. And then, the voices. "It's done," said a man. His voice was familiar, with that arrogant undertone he always tried to hide in public. She didn't even flinch when the sedative hit. A woman answered, low and smooth, like honey with poison underneath. She never saw it coming. "God, Mark, we actually pulled it off." Mark. My husband. And the woman, Laura. My best friend. My brain refused to believe it at first. But as I lay in the silence that followed, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shovel scraping against earth, and then, laughter. They were burying me. I still can't believe she fell for it. "The whole spa weekend thing?" Laura said with a scoff. "She never suspected a thing," Mark replied. "And now, we get everything. The insurance money, the house. No more secrets. No more pretending." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Rage started where the fear had lived. They wanted me gone. Not just gone, dead. The people I loved most, plotting my murder like it was a real estate deal. Outside, two more voices joined. Gruff, tired men, gravediggers, I guessed. "Damn, this one's heavy," one said. "Feels like the whole casket's made of lead." "Just finished the job, man. This place gives me the creeps." Only one sound kept me sane, the barking. Low, sharp, and persistent. A dog nearby, barking its lungs out like it knew I was in there. I didn't recognize the bark, but it grew louder, more urgent. I prayed someone would notice. That someone would care. Suddenly, everything stopped. The digging. The voices. Then, scraping. The unmistakable creak of a lid. Light cut across my vision like a blade. I blinked through the blur and saw a man standing over me, wide-eyed and pale. "What the hell?" he gasped, dropping his shovel. "She's alive." I tried to speak. My throat cracked with the effort. "Help me." "Jesus Christ," he muttered, looking around in panic. "They said you were dead. You were supposed to be." I grabbed his wrist with the last of my strength. "Please. Don't tell them. They'll finish it. They'll kill me for real." The man, maybe 50, with tired eyes and dirt under his nails, nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Come on. We'll get you out of here." He pulled me free, wrapped me in his coat, and half-carried me to a tiny building at the cemetery's edge, a guardhouse. Inside was an old kettle, a narrow cot, and a dog curled up on a rug by the heater. The same one that barked. "Name's Gus," he said. "That's Jasper." He gave me water. "You got a name?" I hesitated. The world had just fallen apart, and I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But I said it anyway. "Claire." "Well, Claire," Gus said, "looks like you just came back from the dead. Now tell me who the hell wants you buried." Gus poured me a second cup of water while Jasper sat pressed against my leg like he already knew I needed him. We were quiet for a while. I was shivering, even though the room wasn't cold. It was the kind of shaking that comes after your body survives something your mind hasn't fully processed yet. Gus didn't rush me. He just sat on the cot, staring into his chipped coffee mug, waiting. I heard them, I said finally, my voice raw. My husband. My best friend. They put me in there, together. Gus rubbed his face like the truth was something heavy on his skin. You sure? I'd recognize their voices anywhere. Mark drugged me. Laura helped him do it. They wanted me dead. He stared at the floor. Why? I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Money. Insurance. A house. A new life together, without me in the way. He didn't say anything right away. Just nodded slowly, like he'd heard stories like this before, even if not quite so literal. I'll help you, Gus said after a while. But we gotta be smart. You show your face too soon, they'll panic. Might try again. This time, they'll finish it. So what do we do? You give them what they want, he said. Make them think they've won. And while they're celebrating, we catch them red-handed. I blinked at him. How? He tapped his temple. You said they don't know you're alive. That's power. We use that. I studied Gus more closely now. He looked like someone who'd been underestimated most of his life, balding, worry, face like worn leather, but his eyes were sharp. Calculating. We need proof, I said. He nodded. Exactly. We get them talking. A confession. If they think someone's blackmailing them, someone who knows what they did, they might slip. I felt something shift in my chest. The terror was still there, coiled tight, but underneath it, something else was blooming. Fury. Purpose. I want to be there when it happens. Gus grinned. I figured you might. We spent the next hour drafting a plan. Gus would reach out to Mark, using a burner phone. He'd claim to know about the coffin, the sedative, the accidental death. He'd suggest a meeting, alone, at the cemetery, where they thought I was buried. Gus would pretend to be someone who wanted money in exchange for silence. If he agrees to meet, Gus said, you stay hidden. You listen. We record everything. I nodded. What if he brings Laura? Even better, he said. 2 confessions. The dog barked once. Gus patted his head like it was a good omen. We'll set it for tomorrow night. Gives us time to prep. What about the police? I know a guy, he said simply. Clean cop. Owes me a favor. I looked around the cramped room, the flickering heater, the mismatched mugs, the peeling paint, and realized this was the safest place I'd ever been. You saved my life, I said quietly. Gus didn't meet my eyes. You don't owe me anything, Claire. Just make it worth something. That night, I lay on the cot wrapped in a borrowed blanket while Jasper snored at my feet. I didn't sleep. Not really. But I didn't cry either. For the first time since the darkness closed in, I felt something close to hope. Gus stood at the edge of the cemetery as dusk settled in, his breath fogging in the cooling air. I was already hidden, tucked behind a thick row of hedges just a few feet from the old mausoleum. Jasper lay beside me, ears alert, body still. We had set up the recorder earlier that afternoon, tucked carefully beneath the bench near the meeting spot. Gus had tested it twice to make sure every word would be captured. Mark texted back fast after the burner message, "Who is this? What do you want?" Gus kept it short, "You know what you did. Meet me where she's buried. Midnight. Come alone." Mark responded with a single word, "Fine." I wasn't sure if I wanted him to come alone or not. Part of me wanted to see Laura's face when the trap closed. The other part just needed to hear them say it, out loud. That I hadn't imagined any of this. That they'd meant to kill me. Midnight came. We heard the crunch of tires on gravel before we saw the headlights. A sleek black SUV pulled up slowly and parked along the fence line. Mark stepped out, phone in hand, looking around with a mixture of paranoia and arrogance. Classic. He walked toward the bench, alone. He sat down, leaned forward, and whispered into the dark. "All right. I'm here. What do you want?" Gus stepped from the shadows, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket. "Let's keep this simple," he said. "I know what you did. I know you and the woman drugged your wife. I know she woke up in a coffin." Mark didn't respond at first. Just stared. Then, he laughed. Not loud. More like a low, disbelieving chuckle. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "This is insane." Gus shrugged. "Is it?" Mark looked around again. "There's no proof of anything." "You sure?" Gus asked. "Because someone might have recorded what you just said." Mark stood up. His whole posture shifted from cocky to dangerous in a blink. "What do you want? Money?" Gus didn't blink. "I want you to talk. I want you to tell me exactly what happened. Why you did it. How?" And just like that, like Gus predicted, Mark opened his mouth. Because he couldn't help himself. Claire was in the way, he snapped. "We tried to do it clean. Laura said the sedative would make it look natural. A heart thing, in her sleep. But she didn't," he caught himself too late. "She didn't wake up, until later." Gus tilted his head. "So you buried her alive?" Mark exhaled, frustrated. "I thought she was gone." Laura checked her pulse. "It was her idea to speed things up with the burial." My stomach turned. "And the inheritance?" Gus pressed. Mark gritted his teeth. $500,000 from the policy. Another $250,000 from the house. We were starting over. Clean slate. Gus took a step back. That was all we needed. He tapped his jacket pocket, where the mic was wired, and gave a sharp whistle. From the far side of the cemetery, headlights flipped on. A car pulled in fast, unmarked, no sirens. Mark turned to run. But Jasper was already moving. He launched from the hedge beside me, snarling, cutting Mark off in seconds. The officer, a tall man in plain clothes, stepped out and had Mark on the ground before he could recover from the dog's charge. "I'd stay down if I were you," the officer muttered, cuffing him. "Everything you just said? Recorded." Mark screamed Laura's name like it was a magic word that might save him. It didn't. Gus looked at me. "Time to finish this." I stepped out of the shadows. Mark's face drained of color. "Claire?" I didn't flinch. "Hello, darling. Did I surprise you?" He just stared. Jaw slack, mouth open, soul gone. "Good." Mark's voice echoed behind me as I walked away. "Claire, please. Let me explain. I thought you were dead?" He never finished the sentence. The officer read him his rights as Jasper barked once, loud enough to smother the last lie Mark tried to spit out. By the time they shoved him into the back of the unmarked car, I was already back in the guardhouse, sitting at Gus's tiny kitchen table with a mug of coffee and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "He said enough to bury himself," Gus muttered, removing the recorder's card and slipping it into a plastic case. "And probably that woman too." "Laura," I said, the name like poison in my mouth. "She'll be next," the cop had told us earlier. If she was part of it, and based on what he said, she was, we'll get her. It didn't feel like justice. Not yet. Just silence. Exhaustion. I'd survived something most people only read about in crime novels. I wasn't supposed to be here at all. And the world outside just kept moving like nothing had happened. That night, I slept in Gus's spare cot again. This time, I dreamed of dirt falling on my face. Of Laura laughing while Mark sealed the lid. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, with Jasper whining at my feet. "You're safe," Gus murmured from the other room. "You're safe now, Claire." But was I? The next few days passed in fragments. Police interviews. Medical tests. Statements. I told the story over and over again, the spa weekend invitation, the glass of wine I never finished, the strange sleep, the darkness. Every officer who heard it shook their head in disbelief. When the news broke, the media spun it like something out of a thriller. "Wife buried alive in bizarre inheritance plot" was one headline. "Dead woman returns to expose husband" was another. Reporters camped near my house. I never went back. I stayed with Gus. He didn't say much, and I didn't push. He let me sit on his porch while Jasper curled at my feet and the world slowly began to feel real again. No one asked me to smile. No one tried to make sense of it too soon. "You got family?" he asked one evening. "Not anymore," I said. He nodded, like he understood more than I said. "What about you?" He hesitated. "Had a son. Disappeared years ago. They said he died. But they never found the body." My chest tightened. "I'm so sorry." "Life's funny that way," he said softly. "Sometimes you think something's dead, and it's not." His words stuck with me. A week later, the police arrested Laura. She cracked fast, tried to paint Mark as the mastermind, claimed she only went along with it out of fear. But they found emails. Conversations. Plans. She had bought the sedative. She had booked the coffin. She had ordered the quick burial. She smiled when she picked out the lining, the funeral home clerk told detectives. I watched the courtroom footage from Gus's old TV, clutching Jasper like a lifeline. They both pled guilty. Mark got 25 to life. Laura, 20. It wasn't enough, not really. But it was something. I didn't cry when the verdict came. I didn't speak to the reporters who waited outside the courthouse. Instead, I walked Jasper through the cemetery, past the plot where I was supposed to rot. I stood there for a long time. Not grieving. Not remembering. Just closing a chapter. The grave that was meant to be mine stood quietly under a gray sky. No headstone. Just a patch of disturbed earth. They'd never gotten far enough to mark it. I suppose I should have felt lucky, but luck felt like a cruel word for someone who had been silenced, buried, and forgotten. "I think I want to leave this place," I told Gus one morning, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. "I need to feel alive again." He nodded, petting Jasper, who perked up as if he understood. "I get it. You're free now. But if you ever need anything." "I know." I hugged him that night. The kind of hug you only give someone who saw you at your absolute worst and didn't look away. But before I could leave town, something unexpected happened. It started with a letter, yellowed, torn at the edge, slipped under the guardhouse door. Gus found it early one morning and called me, confused. "It's from the hospital," he said. "Years old. About my son." His hands shook as he handed it to me. The letter was from a rural clinic, dated nearly 10 years back. It mentioned a boy, found injured in the woods, no ID, no known relatives. They'd listed him as deceased after he disappeared from the facility months later, presumed dead. But the language was strange. Uncertain. There was no confirmed death certificate. "I never knew about this," Gus said, voice hoarse. "They never told me he was there." "Maybe he's still out there," I whispered. I didn't say it to give him false hope. I said it because I knew what it felt like to be buried and still breathing. And something about the letter didn't sit right. That night, I made a few calls. One to a contact I still had at the police department. Another to a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. By the end of the week, we had a lead. A man matching the son's description had been seen months ago in a small town just 2 hours away, disoriented, quiet, working odd jobs under a fake name. He'd limped heavily, had a noticeable scar on his jaw, and refused to speak about his past. Could be him, my contact said. But we'd need DNA to confirm. Gus stared at the photo they'd managed to snap. It wasn't clear. But his hand trembled when he touched the paper. I need to see him. We drove together. Jasper sat in the back, head on my shoulder the whole way. The man was working at a feed store, stacking bags of grain. He looked older than the photo, thinner, worn down. But when Gus stepped forward and whispered his name, just once, the man froze. His eyes met Gus's. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then the man took one staggering step forward. "Dad?" It was all I needed to hear. Gus broke down, cradling his son like he'd come back from the dead. Because in a way, he had. Later, we learned the full story: an accident in the woods, a head injury, memory loss. He'd wandered, lived off scraps, survived on instinct. Someone eventually took him in, but he never remembered who he was. Until now. They ran the DNA test just to be sure. It was a match. I watched the two of them sit under the same tree behind the guardhouse later that week, Gus and his son, talking like no time had passed. It felt like something had shifted in the universe. Like the darkness we'd both escaped had returned something unexpected in its place. "You were there when I had no one," I told Gus quietly. "Now it's my turn." I meant it. I used my legal contacts, pulled strings, helped get his son into treatment. Old injuries, trauma, chronic pain, none of it scared me. I stayed through the appointments. I drove them to rehab centers. I signed paperwork like it was my own blood on the line. Because this was more than survival now. This was healing. This was family. The hospital where Gus's son, Daniel, was now staying was quiet, nestled in the hills outside the city. A calm place. The kind of sterile peace that made me nervous. I visited almost every day. Daniel was healing slowly. Physically, he was regaining strength, but the trauma, both mental and emotional, was taking longer. He'd started remembering things in fragments, flashes of a house near a lake, a red bicycle, a woman with soft eyes and a voice that hummed lullabies when he cried. But his memories didn't match Gus's. Not completely. And that's when the doctor suggested something strange. "A full workup," he said, glancing at both of us. "You mentioned Claire's blood type earlier?" I nodded, confused. "Well, Daniel's is rare. AB negative. Very rare. It's the same as yours. But Gus is O positive. And that doesn't line up." Gus sat beside me, silent. "I'm not his biological father," he said suddenly, voice tight. "We adopted Daniel when he was a baby. Didn't want him to know. He was ours, no matter what." I looked at Daniel. And something clicked. The hair. The eyes. The faint dimple in his left cheek. "I want a test," I whispered. "Claire," Gus started. "Please." They agreed. We waited 3 excruciating days. On the 4th, the doctor met us in the hospital courtyard. He held a manila envelope and a stunned expression. "I don't know how else to say this," he began. "Claire. Daniel is your biological brother." The words didn't make sense at first. I just stared, thinking he had to be wrong. But as he laid out the details, birth dates, switched records, adoption logs, it began to unravel. I was born in June 1986, I said, slowly. The hospital said my mother had twins. But my parents told me the other didn't make it. Gus rubbed his hands together, shaken. We were told Daniel was abandoned. No names, no family. Somewhere, someone had lied. Covered something up. My brother had been taken, or lost, and raised by someone else. And then lost again. Gus had raised him with love. With care. And now we were all standing in the ruins of some ancient mistake that no one had corrected. I stared at Daniel, who was silent through it all. His eyes filled with something between disbelief and cautious hope. "You're my sister?" he asked. I nodded. "And you're still my dad," he said, looking at Gus. Gus broke then. Not from guilt, but from something deeper. Gratitude. Relief. The three of us sat together that evening on the porch of the guardhouse. Jasper at our feet. A strange, accidental family, bound not just by circumstance, but by fate. And I realized something profound: I hadn't just escaped death. I'd found something worth living for. It happened on a Sunday morning. I was helping Gus organize some old storage boxes when the call came through, a blocked number, one ring, then silence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My body remembered what my brain had almost forgotten: danger doesn't knock. It slips in, quiet and bold. 5 minutes later, the detective who had handled my case called. "Claire, we need to talk. It's about Mark." My blood ran cold. He escaped. 2 words. 2 words that shattered every illusion of safety I had started to build. "How?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Transfer between facilities. Van was ambushed. Someone helped him. We think he might try to reach out to you." I didn't hear anything after that. I was already packing a bag. Gus insisted we move to a secure location. He had a friend, former military, now running private security. The kind of man who didn't ask too many questions, just watched the shadows and waited for movement. His name was Cole. He arrived before sunset. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A quiet force. He didn't shake hands. Didn't smile. Just gave a sharp nod and said, "I'll take it from here." At first, I resented him. His presence felt like a reminder that I was still not free. That danger still lived somewhere in the dark. But then something shifted. He didn't treat me like a victim. He didn't tiptoe around the trauma. He just watched. Listened. Kept me safe without smothering me. I moved into a secured apartment under his protection. Cole was always nearby, silent but alert. He had scars he never spoke about and eyes that had seen too much. But when he looked at me, there was no pity. Just a strange kind of understanding. "You ever lose someone?" I asked him one night, unable to sleep. He nodded. "Not just someone. Whole pieces of myself." That was all he said. And yet, it was enough. Days passed. Mark remained missing. The police circulated warnings. Laura, still in custody, claimed she knew nothing. But I knew him. He wouldn't stop until he finished what he started. Cole began training me in small ways: how to move quietly, how to watch for signs. He even taught me how to shoot, just in case. "You're not broken," he told me one night, after I dropped a magazine on the floor and almost cried from the sound. "You're rebuilding. Piece by piece." I didn't mean to fall for him. But I think it started the day he stood outside my apartment in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, refusing to leave his post while I slept. He'd become more than a shield. He was becoming my future. But then, Mark struck. A break-in. The windows were locked, the alarm was on, but he still got inside. He didn't make it past the living room. Cole tackled him to the ground before he could reach me, pinning him with a knee to the chest until the cops arrived. Blood. Screaming. The chaos of a man undone by his own hatred. I stood there, frozen, until it was over. Later, Cole sat beside me, a long gash on his arm, barely wincing. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, tears finally falling. I thought I was going to lose everything again. "You won't," he said simply. "Not while I'm breathing." That night, I realized something that terrified me more than Mark ever could. I loved him. Cole survived the attack. Barely. The gash on his arm turned out to be deeper than we thought, severed muscle, torn nerves. He lost too much blood before the ambulance arrived, and by the time we reached the hospital, his pulse was weak. I stayed with him as long as they'd let me. Sat in a cold waiting room, still in my pajamas, blood drying on my hands that wasn't even mine. I stared at the floor for what felt like hours, replaying every second. The sound of glass shattering. The guttural growl from Jasper before the first blow landed. Mark's face, twisted and frantic, right before Cole drove him into the ground. They put Mark in isolation this time. No bail. No contact. But none of that mattered when the man who'd saved me was behind a hospital door, hooked up to machines. "He's stable," the surgeon finally said. "But there's some neurological damage. He may need physical therapy. Long term. We'll know more when he wakes up." He didn't wake up. Not for days. And in those days, I became something else. Not a survivor. Not a victim. Not even the woman who'd been buried and betrayed. I became someone who loved someone more than she feared the past. I sat beside Cole's hospital bed every night, my hand in his, whispering promises I didn't know I'd ever get to keep. "I'll wait," I told him once. "As long as it takes." Daniel visited. So did Gus. Jasper refused to leave Cole's side, curling up under the hospital bed like a soldier on duty. I kept a journal during those days. I wrote him letters he might never read. I told him about the dog, about the breeze outside, about how the coffee from the hospital vending machine tasted like burnt toast and regret. But mostly, I wrote about him. About how he made me feel strong again. Whole. Loved. On the 7th night, I placed my head gently beside his and whispered, "I'm pregnant." I hadn't meant to tell him like that. I hadn't even fully believed it until I saw the second test confirm it. But once the words left my mouth, I didn't want to take them back. "You don't have to wake up for me," I whispered. "But I hope you do for them." And then, just as the words left my lips, his fingers moved. The monitor beeped a little faster. His eyelids twitched. "Cole?" I stood. His mouth parted. A low groan escaped. Then, slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. He looked at me like I was the sun rising for the first time. "You stayed," he croaked. I laughed through tears. Of course I did. He tried to lift his hand, but winced. "Don't move," I said, leaning in. "Just listen." And then I told him everything. The baby. The future. The hope I didn't dare hold on to before he came into my life. He cried. I cried. Even the damn dog whimpered. And for the first time since I clawed my way out of a coffin, I let myself believe in a future not built on pain, but on love. Cole's recovery was slow. There were days when he couldn't lift his arm, couldn't hold a pen, couldn't even button his shirt without help. At first, he hated it. The man who had once stood like an immovable wall now winced with every movement. But he never once asked me to leave. He let me help him. That was his act of love. I moved us into a cottage outside the city, quiet, tucked between rows of pine trees, close enough to Gus and Daniel to still feel like family. The porch had a swing, and every morning Jasper sat on it like he owned the place. Cole spent his afternoons walking up and down the gravel path with me. One hand on my belly, the other in mine. He didn't say much at first. Just listened to the wind, to the birds, to my voice as I told him about nursery colors and silly baby names. "You know," he said one evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, "I never thought I'd get this far." I turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "I've been in war zones," he said. "I've done things. Lost people. I thought maybe that was it for me. That I wasn't meant for softness. For love." "You were wrong," I said softly. He nodded, almost smiling. "Yeah. I was." He knelt down slowly, not just because of the injury, but because what he was about to say carried weight. His fingers brushed against my growing belly, and his eyes never left mine. "I want to marry you, Claire." I froze. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming certainty that I had already said yes in every way except the words. He pulled a ring from his pocket, nothing flashy, just a simple band of gold. But it gleamed in the fading light like it had been waiting for this moment all its life. "I don't care if we do it in a courthouse or under the stars," he said. "I just want to build the rest of this life with you. Not to protect you. Not to save you. Just to love you." I knelt down with him, tears running down my cheeks. "Yes," I whispered. "God, yes." The wedding was small. Gus officiated. Daniel stood beside Cole, proud and whole. Jasper wore a tiny bow tie and barked at the wrong moment, making everyone laugh. We held the ceremony on the grounds behind our cottage, beneath the arch of pine trees. I didn't wear white. I wore deep green, the color of rebirth, of forests, of life coming back after devastation. Cole stood in front of me, scarred, imperfect, healing, and more beautiful than anyone I had ever known. And when I said my vows, I didn't just promise love. I promised light. I promised to never bury my heart again. I promised a new legacy for the child growing inside me. No more secrets. No more graves. Only growth. Only life. I walked down the aisle barefoot. Not because I forgot my shoes, but because I wanted to feel the earth. The same earth that once threatened to swallow me now held me up, steady and warm beneath my steps. Cole stood at the altar, hands trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the lingering damage Mark left behind. He still carried the pain, but not alone anymore. Our child kicked as I reached him. It was like a quiet cheer from within. We said our vows beneath the trees, the wind carrying our words higher than we could ever reach on our own. Gus teared up. Daniel, my brother, stood tall, smiling as if he could barely believe this was real. But it was. We kissed. And when we turned to face the small gathering of people who had become our family, I felt it fully for the first time. Peace. It didn't mean everything was perfect. Trauma leaves fingerprints that don't wash off. I still wake up some nights with the feeling of dirt on my chest. I still hesitate in the dark. But I am no longer alone in the shadows. Our child was born in spring, a little girl with my eyes and Cole's steady gaze. We named her Lily, after the flower that blooms from buried bulbs, breaking through the soil even after the harshest winters. Gus built her a wooden cradle by hand. Daniel carved her name into the base. Jasper slept beside it every night like a silent guardian. And Cole, he held her like she was his redemption. People often ask me how I survived what happened. How I found strength to face down betrayal, to rebuild, to love again. The answer is simple. I was never supposed to survive. But I did. Because somewhere in that dark place, inside that coffin, in the silence, in the betrayal, I decided that if I ever got out, I would stop surviving and start living. Really living. And now? Now I wake up each morning in a home filled with laughter and muddy paw prints and the scent of coffee. I listen to the birds, kiss my husband's scars, hold my daughter close. I survived death. But more importantly, I found my life.